This past Thursday here on Around the Bases, I said that if all went according to plan, by Friday, this past Friday, we'd have every MLB team in action for the first time in 12 days. Well, as is so much the case in 2020, everything did not go according to plan, and we are currently up to 16 days and counting since every team has been in action on the same day due to COVID-19 postponements. Hello, everyone, and welcome into today's edition of Around the Bases, live streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. Also available on demand on the website and on our YouTube channel, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as all of our other 110 Sports Network coverage. On any of those platforms, just search for 110 Sports. It's great to be with you here on this Tuesday, August 11th, as we have got a lot to talk about. As I mentioned, the Cardinals are still out of action. More series being postponed for that team. Hopefully an end in sight to their postponements, but that's not really the first priority for the team at this point. We'll talk about where things stand there. A lot to talk about here on today's show, so let's go ahead and just jump right in to today's rundown, what you can expect on ATB Live on this Tuesday. We'll start, as always, with our top four. We'll discuss the Cardinals' situation as they still remain sidelined. There have been calls, or at least people saying that, look, we're getting to the point that the season should be shut down. The team should be shut down for the Cardinals. The Cardinals should be shut down, rather. Given these circumstances, people are saying that. Others are saying not so fast. People in the organization are saying, that's getting back to play is not our very first priority right now. So we'll talk about where things stand there. Then we'll dive into one of the big storylines right now, the two Cleveland Indians starters who violated protocols, health and safety protocols, by going out over the weekend in Chicago. We'll discuss the latest there. Then we'll get into another one of the hot topics, which is Oakland outfielder Ramon Laureano getting into the situation that happened, the bases clearing situation between the Astros and the Athletics over the weekend, where Laureano charged the Astros bench, in particular one of their coaches, for something that he said. We'll talk about what Laureano said that was all about coming up, and then we'll dive into this question of a postseason bubble. It's apparently something baseball is exploring, considering at this point. We'll talk about that coming up in our top four. Then, as always, we'll get into our news and notes, some other items of note here, injury updates, storylines, things that didn't fit in our top four that I wanted to talk about today. After that, we'll do as we always get into on Tuesdays, our power ranking spotlight. As always, every week, I am power ranking every one of the 30 MLB teams. That story is up now on the website at 110sportsmedia.com. We'll go through some of the biggest risers and fallers from the past week. A couple of teams are really hot. There's some notable teams that are crumbling right now. We'll discuss that. And we'll wrap up the show with our Tuesday stock watch. So some players whose stock is rising, some players whose stock is falling. Just some players who are incredibly hot right now, some players who are really struggling, some stars who are struggling. How much does it mean? What do we make of it? We'll get into that to wrap up today's show. So that's what you can expect here on today's episode of Around the Bases. Let's go ahead and dive right into our top four, starting with, of course, this. And I am looking forward to the day that we can start a broadcast and start our top four with something other than COVID-19 related news, but it is one of the most important things to talk about right now, and that is the Cardinals' situation. After several positive COVID-19 tests led to the postponement of the Cardinals series in Milwaukee and Detroit, the Cardinals were set to resume play this past Friday at home against the Cubs after multiple days of negative tests. They had come back to St. Louis after quarantining in Milwaukee. But then additional positive tests this past Friday morning, led to the postponement of that series, as well as the team's scheduled home series to begin this week against Pittsburgh, and their scheduled doubleheader at Detroit, slated for this Thursday. They have all been postponed at this point. As of now, the team has had a total of, at last check, 17 positive tests, 10 players, 7 staff members. While some of the infected Cardinals have been asymptomatic, others have been treated in the emergency room, dealing with fevers, coughs, headaches, and uncertainty. John Mozeliak, the Cardinals president of baseball operations, telling the Post-Dispatch, "It's real, people are sick, it's scary because they just don't know what the next day is going to bring for them." Monday, Major League Baseball put out a statement in postponing the games this week that Major League Baseball and the Cardinals believe it is prudent to continue additional testing while players and staff are quarantined before the team returns to play. More information regarding the Cardinals' resumption of play will be announced later in the week. As currently scheduled, the Cardinals are still set to play. Their next game on the schedule is set for Friday in Chicago to begin a 3-game series against the White Sox. That is still on as of this point, but of course, no guarantee at this point, of course, given the situation as it's developed. The Cardinals have played just 5 games this season and haven't played in nearly 2 weeks at this point. And even if they resume play on Friday in Chicago, it will have been 16 days since their last game. And even in that best case scenario moving forward, the Cardinals would have to play at minimum 55 games in 45 days to reach 60 for the season. And that may be what the league tries to do in trying to get the Cardinals to complete all 60 games. But it may not, as well, as it seems Rob Manfred, in talking with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on Monday, saying, I think whether you get all the way to 60 or not, that's difficult at this point. I think it's possible for them to play enough games to be a credible competitor this season. So that's baseball's commissioner sort of admitting, look, there's a good chance they're not going to get to 60 games. So far, heading into this week, baseball had been rescheduling a lot of games. Even after the Cardinals' outbreak, it seemed like if they had gotten back on track on Friday against the Cubs, that every team was going to be able to get to 60 games, presuming the big if that everything was pretty smooth sailing the rest of the way. But now it's sort of at the point where getting to 60 games doesn't seem very practical for the Cardinals, and Manfred admitting that, but he does say he thinks they can play enough games to be a credible competitor. Many people, though, have said that as the postponements continue to rack up, that the team should be shut down for the season. Manfred, though, saying, I absolutely see a path back for the Cardinals that is dependent on getting enough days with no positives that we're comfortable with, that we don't have a contagion risk. But yes, 100% I see a path back. Manfred also telling the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that he sees that the revisions to the protocols that we've seen in baseball that we talked about on Thursday are reflective of what the league has learned from the Cardinals and Marlins situations. Manfred saying, quote, a principal takeaway for me is what the doctors have been saying to us for more months than I care to think about right now. It's about the masks. Masks are a huge, huge, huge part of keeping people safe. Number 2, something else that has been said generally and applies to us is it's a series of little things that everyone has to do in order to keep safe. And then the third one, and the Cardinal situation is particularly reflective of this, is the virus is unpredictable. It really is unpredictable. That's Commissioner Rob Manfred. Overall, he still believes the Cardinals can be competitive, can get back on the field in 2020. A couple other things to note as far as the Cardinals situation as it stands right now. There have been, as we talked about multiple times here on the show, there were reports and rumors and speculation in previous weeks about players on the Cardinals going to casinos and doing things that are, clearly bad ideas, horrible ideas at the least, and at the most they are, they're breaking protocols as they now stand. As we talked about on the show, Cardinals president of baseball operations John Mozeliak saying there's no reason to believe those reports are true. The journalists who looked into it finding no evidence to support the idea that Cardinals players had been out to casinos and those reports. And then Cardinals veteran starting pitcher Adam Wainwright on KFNS radio Monday saying, quote, if you see 29 teams playing baseball and you see one team that's not, you go, well, what did they do differently? They obviously did something to warrant what's happening right now. I can tell you what did happen was an honest mistake, Wainwright said. The bars and stuff, the casinos we heard, the strip clubs or whatever, that did not happen. That's Cardinals starting pitcher Adam Wainwright. So again, to sort of wrap this up here, Cardinals are slated to resume play at this point on Friday in Chicago against the White Sox. We will see if that happens, but the first priority at this point, as has been expressed by Cardinals officials, is simply quarantining to the point of making sure that the outbreak can be stopped, is over. They need to stop the spread within the organization. And after that attempt to start things back up, after multiple days of negative tests, then a positive test, there's been another positive test since. The team's just going to be especially cautious now, as they should be, to make sure that things are clear before the resumption of play is even really that much of a thought. It's an unfortunate situation, obviously, and the most important thing is player health. But I am not in the position of saying yet that I think the team should be shut down for the season. I think that if they are indeed able to resume play on Friday in Chicago, or over the weekend in Chicago, that while they might not be able to get to 60 games, they could get to 50, 55 without that much of a struggle going forward. That's, again, assuming that things go smoothly the rest of the way, which is no guarantee. But I don't think it's time to give up on a team playing a good slate of games this season at this point. All right, our second top four item today is the situation involving the Indians. 2 Indian starters have been sent home in the last few days for violating COVID-19 protocols. On Sunday, we learned that right-hander Zach Plesac had gone out with friends on Saturday night in Chicago, something that reportedly angered his teammates and club officials and was in violation of Major League Baseball's protocols. Plesac issuing a statement Sunday saying, "I would like to apologize to my teammates, the entire Cleveland organization, and all of our fans for my actions Saturday evening. I realize I made a poor choice to leave the hotel, which broke protocols and could have endangered other people." And Plesac was sent home by the Indians, given a rental car, sent home to quarantine away from the team, given the situation. And that seemed to be the full extent of the situation. Clearly, it was not good. It was a bad, clearly it was a bad situation, but that seemed to be the full extent of it. But then just last night, we learned that Indians starter Mike Clevinger, one of the team's top pitchers and one of the top pitchers in the American League, had gone out with Plesac on Saturday night. And while Plesac drove home, as I mentioned, on a rented car on Sunday, Clevinger traveled with the team on their plane, on their flight on Sunday, before they found out what happens, it appears. The Indians putting out a statement last night that Clevinger has been instructed to quarantine and will undergo testing away from the team. He has been scratched from his scheduled start tonight against the Cubs, with right-handed pitcher Adam Plutko starting in his place. MLB Network's John Heyman tweeting last night that he heard Clevinger sat through a team meeting on Sunday and defended Zach Plesac, knowing he'd been out with Plesac, then flew back with the team. Now the Indians discover Clevinger was out with Plesac, and so they have appropriately quarantined Clevinger. So that was an interesting situation to see develop, and that's the reporting on that situation. That it seems both of them went out. Plesac, it was found out that he had gone out in violation of MLB's protocols on Saturday night, but he didn't reveal that Clevinger had been with him. Clevinger defends him, reportedly, in a meeting on Sunday, flies back with the team, and then yesterday the team finds out he'd been with Plesac. The Indians certainly are handling this the right way, I will say that, it appears. Taking immediate action, sending the player home as soon as they find this information out to quarantine with Plesac, away from the team, making sure that he would not be interacting with his teammates until he had been quarantined and tested plenty of times. Of course, they didn't have that opportunity, it appears, with Clevinger. It's certainly puzzling that they knew about Plesac like 24 hours before they found out that Clevinger had been out with him. That's certainly an odd situation. But the Indians seem to be handling this the right way. Obviously, the pitchers involved completely didn't. These are pitchers who have both spoken out, or both on the record with quotes to the media, speaking out about the importance of individual responsibility of players in previous weeks. That the role that players individually have to take to be responsible for themselves and their teammates and the league. And then they are found out to be blatantly breaking protocols by going out in Chicago on Saturday night. And that's just unacceptable behavior. There's no way around that. I mean, especially, not even especially, but you would think in wake of what's happening with the Cardinals and the Marlins and what everyone has observed about how fast and how seemingly easy COVID-19 can spread among clubhouses, that would be somewhat of a wake-up call. But clearly unacceptable behavior from the part of Plesac and Clevenger. And somebody pointed out on Twitter, I saw this, some people talking about this last night, pointing out that it does make you wonder about other teams. And, this is the first case we found out about a team during the season, during the regular season, disciplining a player, sending a player home, sending multiple players home for breaking protocols. So you have to wonder, so people have pointed out, well, could this be something that's been happening at other organizations that just hasn't gotten public, or the team hasn't handled it in such a strict way? It's an interesting question. Obviously, we don't know the answer to it, but again, Indians seem to be handling this right, but it's not acceptable behavior from two of the pitchers in the rotation for the Indians, one of the best rotations in baseball for the time being. Of course, at least is going to be without two of its better pitchers. Of course, Plesac is young and not especially proven, but he's been off to a great start. And like I said, Clevenger, one of the best pitchers in the league. But doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't excuse the behavior on the part of those two players. Move on to our third item today. One of the bigger stories in baseball over the weekend was the bases-clearing melee between the Astros and the Athletics. After getting hit by a pitch for the third time in the series on Sunday, Oakland center fielder Ramon Laureano jawed with several Astros, including pitcher Humberto Castellanos. Now, Laureano did take first base, but video shows Houston hitting coach Alex Cintron seemingly instigating a confrontation, which is what happened as Laureano then charged the Astros dugout, leading the benches to clear. Laureano telling ESPN's Jeff Passan yesterday that Cintron made a vile comment about his mother, prompting him to charge the bench, with Laureano telling Passan that Cintron said in Spanish something you don't say about my mother. Passan reporting through an Astros employee, Cintron denied talking about Laureano's mother. He declined to detail what he did say. The league is currently weighing disciplinary measures at this time. I actually expected that we'd find out yesterday about suspensions in this matter, but that did not come out. It seems like a bit of a complicated situation as far as maybe an investigation being a little bit more in depth, maybe talking to other players in the Astros dugout, what was said, what happened. So maybe that is part of the reason we haven't gotten a suspension information yet at this time. Passan writing that Laureano is expected to be suspended, but that Cintron, because he is a coach and is expected to set a standard of behavior, stands to receive a significantly lengthier ban, according to sources telling that to ESPN's Jeff Passan. Laureano saying that despite being hit 3 times, he doesn't actually bear any ill will toward the Astros. He doesn't believe any of the hit by pitches were intentional, and he also said his frustration did not stem from the sign stealing situation, the Astros' lack of punishment for individual players from their 2017 season. The notable quote from Laureano, though, in this, which got everyone, reporting on this or, acknowledging this on Twitter, Laureano saying, "I regret charging him because he's a loser. A suspension is understandable, but I hope it's not that many games." So, as Passan reported, again, I don't have a super hot take on this situation, as Passan detailed in his report. The coach should be held to a high standard. He clearly, if you look at the video, which of course I have, he clearly was motioning for Laureano to come at him. It was very clear that the coach was egging him to come get me, essentially. And to be clear, Laureano is going to be suspended too, and that's to be expected. It's needs to happen. I mean, it's appropriate for him to be suspended as well, but I'm curious to see if there'll be any other sort of punishments for other players or coaches involved, given the violation of protocols. Of course, a fight in any season is never a good thing, but in this situation, given the COVID-19 situation, fights are strictly banned, and of course all that is dangerous given the circumstances of the moment as well. As I mentioned, I imagine there probably is an internal investigation. Major League Baseball going to be looking into getting details that may never actually come out to the public. I don't know. There's probably going to be interviews, discussions with other Astros players or coaches about what was said and what exactly happened there. Many people, after this happened, jumped on the Astros sign stealing scandal situation and what had happened with Joe Kelly of the Dodgers a couple weeks ago. And the idea, people saying, this wouldn't have happened if Astros players had been punished properly for the sign stealing scandal. But if you want to take Laureano at his word, this had nothing to do with that. So there's that. So many people just jumped to that assumption. It's still, you could say it could be true. I mean, that could certainly be a factor in the situation. But if you're going to believe Laureano in this situation, he wasn't upset about the hit by pitches. I mean, clearly he was upset about it, but he wasn't harboring, from what he says, any significant ill will from those hit by pitches. But it wasn't until what the Astros coach said to him that he did what he did. So, I think there's something to be said for not jumping to big conclusions when it comes to Astros getting to something. Oh, it's clearly players upset about the sign stealing scandal and lack of individual player punishment. I think it's important not to always jump to that conclusion immediately, to hear from the people involved to see what actually happened. All right, point number 4. One question in recent weeks that people have been talking about as baseball has struggled with COVID-19 and the outbreaks on the Marlins and Cardinals has been, why didn't baseball do a bubble or multiple hubs like the NBA and MLS, and then of course the NHL doing multiple hub cities? Of course, it's not going to change at this point for the regular season. But the LA Times reporting yesterday that the Major League Baseball is in the process of creating contingency plans for the postseason, which does include the possibility of moving some or all postseason games to neutral sites with warm weather and lower spread of COVID-19. Now, there are a few big reasons why a bubble approach for the postseason would make sense for Major League Baseball. Number one, it would hypothetically, potentially, hopefully, minimize the risk of an outbreak situation, which, of course, an outbreak like what we've seen with the Cardinals and Marlins is never a good thing, but it would be, of course, particularly disastrous from a schedule standpoint in the postseason. If in the postseason, you've only got a couple teams there at that point. Of course, the postseason starting with 16, but in the postseason, you have an outbreak. What do? How do you keep the schedule moving? How do you keep teams playing? It would be a much more scheduling nightmare. So there's that reason for the postseason bubble. Also, the postseason does coincide with the start of the flu season, and the COVID-19 situation in this country isn't guaranteed to be much better or any better. It could even be worse by then. We don't really know at that point. So that is a possibility. Those are two reasons why it would make some sense to have baseball considering a bubble approach for the postseason. And I actually missed this report yesterday, but I'm just seeing it this morning. ESPN's Jeff Passan writing that baseball has had preliminary talks for a bubble format as well. Passan writing that it would be difficult to have a fully contained bubble like what's happening in the NBA at Walt Disney World in Florida right now, but that they're looking towards maybe the NHL's formula for having multiple hub cities, something that Passan writing has gained traction. And Passan writing that because of the playoff expansion to 16 teams this year, the league would need at least 3 hubs to begin, and then 2 hubs, and then maybe down to 1 hub. Southern California, the greater Chicago area, and New York metropolitan area would make the most sense, Passan writes, because of the available stadiums. There are some concerns about the weather, of course, in late September and into October. It appears that LA could be a logical choice to host an entire postseason, though sources telling Passan that no favorite has emerged at this point. So this is something that's going to be interesting to watch moving forward, how this develops. I think it could make a lot of sense to have teams playing in a bubble in the postseason. Certainly it's not something, as I mentioned, that's going to change now in season, but I think there's plenty of good reasons for logistically, schedule-wise, health-wise, exploring that possibility of having a bubble in the postseason is going to be something we continue to monitor. I'm sure more information is going to come out about this in the days ahead, and when it does come out, we'll talk about it here on ATB Live. So that is our top four for this Tuesday. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the day. When we come back, we'll go through our news and notes of the day, a couple other items of note, some significant injuries, and opt-out. Players of the week, of this past week were named, some interesting players to discuss. And the Blue Jays starting off their first game in their new home stadium for 2020. We'll talk about that next in news and notes. Then we'll get into our power ranking spotlight this week, and later on we will discuss our stock watch for Major League Baseball. That's all coming up here on Around the Bases from the 110 Sports Network. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here, streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, as well as available on demand on the website, on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Chris Brown, as promised, back with some news and notes for you here on this Tuesday, August 11th. A couple things that didn't fit into our top four that I considered being top four items, and then more things kept popping up, so we'll discuss those right now. Mets starting pitcher Marcus Stroman announced yesterday that he is opting out of the remainder of the 2020 season. Stroman has yet to pitch this season since tearing a calf muscle in summer camp, but he said he's back to 100% and that the decision was not health-related. Stroman tweeting that, quote, "After much consideration and discussion with my family, I have made the difficult decision to opt out of the remainder of the 2020 season. With all the unknowns and uncertainty due to the pandemic, this is the best decision for me and my family. I appreciate the Mets organization for their support and understanding and look forward to returning to baseball next year." Stroman said yesterday that he felt safe with the Mets and praised their commitment to proper protocols, but The Athletic's Tim Britton reporting that the Marlins and Cardinals outbreaks, along with the situation in the country right now, cemented Stroman's choice to opt out of the remainder of the year. The Mets acquired him in a trade from Toronto at last year's trade deadline. Stroman has reportedly accrued enough service time now to still become a free agent in this winter after the end of the season. Stroman entered the season needing just 9 days of service time, and he did get those days of service time while on the injured list. Now, some have criticized Stroman yesterday for getting his service time and then opting out of the season, but former MLB player Will Middlebrooks coming to his defense, among others, and tweeting, "Everyone mad that Stroh made sure he got his service time before opting out needs to realize that teams do this to players all the time. Waiting to call kids up, sending them down to get an extra year of control or avoid arbitration, it's a business, period. Now, my take on that is this situation is yes, Middlebrooks is right, of course, that it's a business situation and that teams all the time do manipulate service time of young players by waiting to bring them up when they're clearly ready, or bringing them up and sending them back down to get extra service time of players for players. And I completely agree with what Middlebrooks is saying there. On top of that, I really feel like any player, like I said before on the show, any player opting out of the 2020 season has the complete right to do that. They should not be criticized for that, and just period, because we don't know what went into that decision. He's telling us it's a family decision. It's not our place as anyone to be to criticize that decision given the circumstances of the situation right now. As for the Mets right now, it is on the field. It's another blow to a rotation behind Jacob deGrom. Noah Syndergaard, of course, out for the season with Tommy John surgery. Michael Wacha, who had been pitching pretty well, is now on the IL with shoulder inflammation. Steven Matz and Rick Porcello both have an ERA of 6.90 or higher. They've both just been an absolute disaster on the field pitching this year. So it's certainly a blow to that Mets rotation. Stroman, like I said, hadn't pitched this year, but they were sort of counting on him to come back and be a reliable arm in that rotation behind deGrom, because there really aren't any reliable arms in that rotation behind deGrom at this point. Another item for you here, pitcher injuries continuing to pile up across the majors. Yesterday, Arizona, the Diamondbacks placed starting pitcher Madison Bumgarner on the IL with a mid-back strain. The 31-year-old is in the first year of a 5-year, $85 million contract, and he had experienced significantly decreased velocity to begin the year, and he pitched pretty horribly to begin the season, a 9.35 ERA in 17 1/3 innings to begin the season. Meanwhile, Tampa Bay placed pitcher Charlie Morton on the injured list yesterday with right shoulder inflammation. Morton had exited his start on Sunday due to the issue, which he said he wasn't worried about missing much time. Kevin Cash, the Rays manager, saying that he's hopeful that Morton will be back after 10 days. Meanwhile, the Dodgers placed right-handed pitcher Joe Kelly on the 10-day IL yesterday with right shoulder inflammation. Of course, Kelly had been suspended, I believe it was 8 games a few weeks back for throwing near the head of Astros Alex Bregman and taunting the Astros. He had appealed that, and he's still waiting on the results of that appeal, so he hasn't served his suspension or seen it reduced or whatever. And given that he's on the IL now, he'll need to be activated before he can begin serving whatever suspension he's left with after the appeal situation is resolved. ESPN's Alden Gonzalez tweeting yesterday evening that he has Madison Bumgarner as the 6th pitcher to go on the injured list just yesterday, which is 56 pitchers on the IL for non-COVID-19 related reasons through the first 18 days of the season. According to ESPN Stats and Information, the first 18 days of 2019, that number was 24. First 18 days of 2018, that number was 19. Again, this year it's 56. And people have mentioned that there's a lot of other factors that could be in play, but it really seems like no matter how you break it down, the nature of this season, likely the quick ramp up, the nature of this season overall has led to increased pitching injuries. Another note for you here, yesterday the MLB Players of the Week were named on Monday per usual. For the American League, it was Oakland starting pitcher Frankie Montas, who went 2-0 with an 0.64 ERA, 14 strikeouts, and 2 starts last week. For the National League, it was Padres shortstop Fernando Tatis, 435 average, 6 homers, 9 RBI last week. Tatis currently, at 21 years old, leads the league in home runs with 8. He's second in OPS at 1.184. Tatis was just recently, a few days ago, reached 30 career home runs in the majors in his 100th major league game. The 21-year-old Tatis has now hit more home runs through his first 100 games in the major leagues than any shortstop in MLB history. Ever. He is 21 years old. Most home runs hit by a shortstop in their first 100 games in Major League Baseball history. Just incredible. This guy is this incredible talent, going to be a star for years to come, well over a decade to come in Major League Baseball. I'm sure really, really incredible stuff from Tatis to begin the season. A few other updates for you here. Washington Nationals starting pitcher Max Scherzer is good to go against the Mets today. He won't miss a turn in the rotation after tweaking his hamstring and leaving a start after 27 pitches last week. Yankees outfielder Giancarlo Stanton has been diagnosed with a grade 1 strain of his left hamstring. He's on the IL. Grade 1 is the least severe of hamstring strains, so that's good, but there's still no timetable for his return, particularly given his injury history in such situations. Also, Cleveland manager Terry Francona is expected to rejoin the team today after missing roughly the last week due to a lingering gastrointestinal issue. Francona is apparently feeling much better now, which is certainly good news. He's back now, going to be back with the Indians, rejoining the team today. Final news and note item for you here tonight. The Blue Jays will play their first game in their home park this season. Of course, that's not Toronto, but in Buffalo, New York. The Athletics' Caitlin McGrath in a story yesterday detailing the changes that have been made to the team's AAA facility in advance of the team's first game there. The goal was to make Sidelined Field in Buffalo, New York feel as much like the team's home stadium at the Rogers Center in Toronto as possible. The clubhouse was transformed, the weight room was transformed to look like their home stadium. The facility also received upgrades to lighting, to the field of play, and to different amenities. They're also now in line, of course, with MLB's health and safety protocols, and new air conditioning was installed. The clubhouse was expanded to accommodate for social distancing. The lower concourse level, where fans would normally be going through to get to their seats, was turned into a training area with batting cages and a weight room for players. Some grass on the infield was replaced. A lot has been going on in the past couple weeks to get that field and that field ready, that stadium ready for the Blue Jays to play their home games there the rest of the 2020 regular season. Another interesting thing about the Blue Jays playing in Buffalo for their regular season games, home games, the rest of the regular season, there's a really interesting history of Major League Baseball, of baseball in Buffalo, New York. The history of the current team goes all the way back. Current AAA Buffalo Bisons goes all the way back to 1877, as the Bisons spent 7 seasons in the 8-team National League from 1879 to 1885. In 1914 and 1915, there was also Major League Baseball in Buffalo, as the Buffeds and the Buffalo Blues, as those teams were called, the same team as it changed names, played in the Federal League, which was the third major league alongside the AL and the NL. So it's quite the history of baseball in Buffalo. Really interesting story on that from Mike Axisa up at CBSSports.com from yesterday, detailing a lot more of the information about the history of baseball in Buffalo, New York. Toronto hosts Miami at Sidelined Field in Buffalo, New York tonight at 6:36 p.m. Eastern. And that is your news and notes for today. So we're going to go ahead and move on here to our next item, which is our Power Rankings Spotlight for this Tuesday. Every Monday, we publish on 110sportsmedia.com our Power Rankings. I publish my Power Rankings each week, going through ranking, as you would expect, all 30 MLB teams. Right now, we are having several teams that are almost a third of the way into their schedule. It is early in the season, the regular season still, but it's not really that early in some ways. We're approaching a third of the way through the season. Like I said, the Cardinals, meanwhile, are an eighth of the way through their schedule, assuming that they play 60 games, which doesn't seem necessarily a guarantee, of course, or even a guarantee to be attempted at this point. So while it's still early, it's kind of not that early at the same time. We're getting into the heart of the schedule here, getting into the middle of the season at this point. So we're going to go through some teams as we did last week, as we're kind of planning to here every week, some teams that are falling in the power rankings and that are on the rise in the power rankings, as well as some other interesting, notable teams thus far from the power rankings that I want to discuss from the past week. What's going on with those notable teams. And we're going to start with some teams that have fallen notably in the past week, and we're going to start with the Los Angeles Angels. The team is 6-11. They were 16th ranked last week. I dropped them 4 spots to 20th this week. The Angels are coming off an impressive 10-9 comeback win over the A's last night, so maybe they'll get some momentum from that. But they were swept over the weekend by the Rangers, and that's kind of pretty representative as I wrote about the team and where it's at this point. Mike Trout is back with the team following the birth of his son, and he's now joined in the outfield by top outfield prospect Joe Adell. Dylan Bundy and Griffin Canning have both impressed in the rotation to begin the year, but they haven't been doing well. Shohei Ohtani, as we've talked about, he's now no longer in the rotation, not pitching anymore this season due to a forearm strain. Anthony Rendon hasn't been hitting well, and the team has a bullpen ERA through Sunday of 4.50. So the Angels right now sit at 6-11. It's been a struggle for them. They certainly have the personnel to get things going. They have an incredible middle of the lineup, as we saw last night, as we had home runs from Rendon, Ohtani, Trout, homered twice last night. We saw how good the middle of that lineup can be, and there's been some interesting pitching in that rotation and some intriguing arms who've done well, in Bundy and Canning and others. And they've got Joe Madden as their manager, clearly a very talented manager, so there's still time. 6-11 isn't a disastrous record, but it is a team that I'm concerned about that's been on the decline in recent weeks. Another team I've noted as falling is the St. Louis Cardinals. They haven't played, of course, as we've talked about. They were 11th last week. I had to drop them to 17th this week, of course. They haven't played, as we've talked about, due to the COVID-19 situation, so in some ways this isn't a fair ranking to be dropping them 6 spots. But basically the reason I'm mentioning them here is because when they do come back to play, they're going to have had a extended off period without games. They're going to be playing a lot of doubleheaders, probably more than any other team in baseball the rest of the way. Even if they don't get close to 60 games, it's still going to be an extremely busy stretch of games for the Cardinals following after a long layoff. I think you have to expect that there could be some struggles for players and for the team overall as a result of that. So that's really the aspect of the Cardinals I wanted to discuss. It's going to be interesting to see how they do perform on the field when they do get back. Of course, like I said, we don't know exactly when that's going to be at this point. Another team that took a step back in this week's rankings is the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds were inside the top 10. Last week they were 9th. They are now 13th in this week's power rankings. This is a team that still hasn't hit their stride this year, but I'm still quite optimistic about the Reds. They were my preseason pick to win the National League Central. That's admittedly seeming much less likely at this point, but they still have the talent. I'm still very optimistic about the Reds. Sonny Gray, Trevor Bauer have both been outstanding to begin the year, and Nick Castellanos looks like an MVP candidate. He has 7 home runs, 16 RBIs, and 1,100 plus OPS through games on Sunday. So I'm still not too discouraged about the Reds. If I was making my predictions again today, I wouldn't be picking them to win the division. I'd have to pick the Cubs. But I'm still optimistic about the Reds in 2020. I still like that rotation. I still like some of those hitters. That middle of the lineup, Joey Votto's been pretty good. Bit of a rebound from him this year, so I'm still optimistic about the Reds overall. But perhaps the most notable team to take another step back in the power rankings this week is the Houston Astros. The Astros fell to 10th, just stayed inside the top 10. Last week they were 7th. I believe the first week they were 4th or 5th in the power rankings. Now they're down to 10, just barely hanging on in the top 10 of our power rankings this week. The Astros are 7-9. They're coming off a 6-4 win last night. It's been rough. This team has been plagued by injuries, perhaps more than any, I think I would say more than any other major league team at this point. We talked about, I believe it was last week, that their bullpen, due to injuries, only had one reliever who wasn't a rookie in it. The team had lost 5 in a row before last night. Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, George Springer, all were hitting 220 or lower through the end of the weekend's action. So it's been really rough, and that kind of says it all right now with the Astros. No real reason to believe that's going to continue. I mean, these are established great hitters. I think they will turn things around. Real concerns about that pitching staff, but I still am optimistic about the Astros being a very good team moving forward. But given all their injuries and the things that are going on right now with them, I could not justify keeping them in the top 5, the top 8, anything like that. So they're hanging on right now in the top 10 at 10th this week in the power rankings. Now for a couple teams that are on the rise this week. One team I had in there was of course, we have to mention the Miami Marlins. This is a team that is 7-3. They became, on August 8th, a few days back, the first team in MLB history to have different pitchers start each of their first 9 games. Of course, was necessitated due to the team's COVID-19 outbreak, which resulted in over a dozen players being placed on the IL. Despite this, they won 5 straight in their return to action before dropping their last couple of games. They're currently atop the NL East standings, the Marlins are, so it's pretty wild. I don't see them being a great team, but they've made significant... I don't even want to say they made significant strides. They've been playing very well, and so I had to bring them up in the power rankings from 27th last week to 22nd this week. Another team that's on the rise is the Colorado Rockies. The Rockies have been one of the hottest teams in baseball over the past couple of weeks. They've yet to lose a series this year, and they ended the weekend as one of only 4 NL teams that had reached double-digit wins. Colorado, as of the end of the weekend's action, Colorado was top 5 in the league in both OPS and ERA, team ERA of 2.84 through Sunday's action. Not something you expect from a Colorado rotation that, of course, is having a pitching staff that's having to pitch half its games at the notoriously hitter-friendly Coors Field. All 4 of the pitchers who started multiple games for the Rockies this season have an ERA under 3.4 through the weekend's action. Daniel Murphy and Matt Kemp have both shown some degree of a resurgence, and then there's Charlie Blackmon, who we'll talk about in our stock watch here in just a couple of minutes. A few other teams that are on the rise. The Oakland Athletics made a big jump in my power rankings this week from 14th to 5th. I've seen them as number 1 on some lists, and that's reflective of how hot they've been as a team the past week or so. I don't get quite that reactionary with my power rankings because I don't want it to stray too much into just a reaction of what teams are the hottest right now rankings. But I have them in the top 5, which is pretty darn significant. They were 14 last week. As of the end of Sunday games, when I wrote the story, they led baseball in wins. They are currently 12-5. No team in baseball hotter than the Athletics. They'd won 9 straight before losing to the Angels last night. A's pitchers a 2.66 ERA through Sunday's action. That's really good. Matt Chapman and Matt Olson have both been hitting well at the corner infield for the A's. This is a team that has notoriously gotten off to relatively slow starts in previous years and then turned things on down the stretch. And I had mentioned, there's not going to be time for that, but they're clearly often going on their stretch run of exciting high-level baseball right now. They're clearly on an incredible run. Another team that's on the rise for me is the Chicago Cubs. They've moved from 8th in last week's power rankings up to 4th. They became the first team in the National League to reach 10 victories. Their rotation's been incredible. When I wrote this on Sunday, if you took out just one inexplicable 13-2 loss to the Royals, their rotation had a 1.95 ERA in every game except for that one. And that's a rotation that I was really concerned about coming into the year. It's been sensational. Of course, that offense has been as advertised. Chris Bryant has been struggling, but when you have that many great bats in the middle of your lineup, as the Cubs do, They found great success. Their bullpen's still a concern. Craig Kimbrell still hasn't been good, but the Cubs have been very impressive, especially that rotation. Everyone's performing from John Lester to Kyle Hendricks to Yu Darvish to Alex Mills, even Tyler Chatwood prior to his horrible start this past Thursday. Cubs have been rolling, and so I had to bring them up to fifth. To fourth in my power rankings this week. A couple other notable things from this week's power rankings. No changes in the top three. I went with Dodgers 1, Yankees 2, Twins 3 for the second or maybe even the third straight week in the power rankings. All three of these teams had gotten off to incredible starts. Some people had moved the Yankees ahead or even the Twins to the top and then shuffled them back down. Both of them struggled. All three of these teams, particularly the Twins and the Yankees, had struggled a little bit, taken a bit of a step back over the weekend and in recent days. But the Twins with an 11-6 record, Yankees 10-6, Dodgers 11-6. I didn't see any need to mix things up. Dodgers, to me, are still the best team in baseball, but Yankees and Twins are right there. And that is another notable thing I wanted to mention. One other team I want to mention here real quickly is the San Diego Padres. The Padres are just outside the top 10. I contemplated bringing them into the top 10 and pulling the Astros out, but I decided to leave the Astros in the top 10. The Padres are now 10-7. Fernando Tatis, as we said, as I mentioned earlier, has been incredible. That's an exciting young team. Chris Paddock at the top of the rotation is an emerging ace. Really exciting team that I could see making their way into the top 10 pretty soon if they continue to find success. 10-7 record at this point after a 2-1 win over the Dodgers last night. All right, we're going to go ahead and take one more break here on Around the Bases on the 110 Sports Network. When we come back, a very quick look at our stock watch this week. Just a couple players I really want to mention who are a couple players who've really been slumping. How much does it mean? A couple stars, and then a couple players who are trending up at this point. We'll discuss that next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. Just a couple minutes left with you here on this Tuesday. So as promised, we're going to go through our stock watch. Each Tuesday, a pretty regular segment here during the season where we go through a couple players who are trending up and trending down and what does it mean. Just a few minutes, we're going to go kind of lightning round with this today. And we're going to start with some players. A couple players here who are trending down. Boston outfielder J.D. Martinez. Hitting just 233, 313, 400 to start the year. Just last night got on the board with his first home run of the season, a big bat in the Red Sox lineup. And like so many players who on Monday I decided to put on trending down, he homered last night. So hopefully good news for JD Martinez, a huge part of the Boston Red Sox lineup. He is 32, chance he's slowing down, but I'm not particularly concerned with Martinez yet at this point. Hopefully this home run last night helps to get him back on track. Another player who's been trending down, who also happened to homer last night as soon as I decided to put them on this list, is Angels third baseman Anthony Rendon. He had been in an 0 for 21 streak when I wrote the power rankings on Sunday, and then he broke out of that slump to the tune of a 2-run home run. He went 2 for 3 last night. He's still hitting just 143 on the season with a pair of home runs, 6 RBI through 13 games. He did have an oblique injury that kept him out of action to begin the season. That would be my only reason for concern. Otherwise, there's just no reason to believe that Rendon, one of the best third basemen in baseball, would just fall off like that. So hopefully last night's good performance for him, a sign of things to come as well. And aside from, unless that oblique injury is still bothering him, I see no other reason for concern with Rendon. A couple players who are trending up. Rockies outfielder Charlie Blackmon. I mentioned that we would talk about him coming up. The 34-year-old, clearly plenty left in the tank. He leads Major League Baseball in hits, tied for the lead in home runs, tied for the lead in RBI, rather. He leads baseball in average and OPS. Blackmon's hitting .484 in 16 games this season, 3 home runs, 19 RBIs. He went 4 for 5 last night against the Diamondbacks to improve his average to .484. According to ESPN Stats and Information, that is the best batting average through a player's first 16 games since Barry Bonds hit .525 in that stretch in 2004. Charlie Blackmon, not much else to say. He's a proven great player, but clearly a lot left in the tank for the Rockies. Not even most of those games have been at home. So many that have been on the road for the Rockies to begin the year. Pretty spacious ballparks on the road, too, I might add. So Blackmon off to an incredible start. A couple other players who are trending up. Texas starting pitcher Lance Lynn notched his 100th career win on Sunday. His sensational start continues. He's 2-0 with a 1.16 ERA through his first 23 and a third innings. He broke out last year. He's in his mid-30s, and he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. It's a strange thing to say, but it is true. He's throwing more fastballs than ever. He made a change in his positioning on the mound last year, and he's legitimately pitching like one of the best pitchers in baseball at this point. A few other players who are trending up. San Francisco's second baseman Donovan Solano is second in Major League Baseball in batting average, hitting .458. A 32-year-old journeyman infielder did perform well in a small sample size with the Giants last year. He has played 97 games with San Francisco. At this point, he's on pace to be just one of a handful of players in the expansion era since 1961 to hit .350 or better in his first 100 games with a major league team. Then there's Christian Yelich. He's still hitting, the Brewers outfielder still hitting just .157 on the year, but he seems to have broken out of his early season slump, which last week had him with the worst WAR value in Major League Baseball, the worst wins above replacement value. Over the last 7 games, though, he's hit 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, 8 walks, 9 strikeouts. He's hitting .292 over his last 7 games. So Christian Yelich appears to be snapping out of his early season really cold streak that he had been in, and has been faring much better in the last week or so. He appears to be trending up. We had talked about Yelich before here on the show and on written pieces that were up at 110sportsmedia.com, and he seems to be breaking through. So those are a couple players who are trending up, and that is our broadcast for today here on Around the Bases on this Tuesday, August 11th, 2020. Couple reminders for you as we head out. Our 110 Sports Network live coverage continues with the J Mole Show with Josh Molenix back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Then Touchline Talk with Josh Doring at 11 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday, followed by Around the Bases here at 1 Eastern, same time, same place. You can also get access to all of our 110 Sports Network coverage, our shows, our podcasts on demand at 110sportsmedia.com. Just click on the video tab or the podcast tab. You can go to Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or YouTube as well. Just search for 110 Sports on those platforms. You can also go to the website and subscribe on the right side of the homepage to our newsletter to get the latest coverage from 110 Sports delivered right to your inbox every Friday. We'll, of course, have the latest with you here, latest MLB news on Thursday's show. But for now, this has been Around the Bases. I'm Chris Brown. Stay safe Thanks for watching, and I will see you on Thursday.